episode 90 of Grace and Steel. I'm Kevin Steele.
And I'm Kevin Michael Grace.
Our podcast has now reached its second anniversary, and, given recent events, we're grateful and a little surprised to be talking to you still. Last week, we began our biannual begging, and now we can give a little more in return. For the first time, Grace and Steel offer a premium gift to our donors. For a donation of $50 or more, you will receive via email a copy of James Burnham's The Machiavellians. This is our own scan of the original text, with a new foreword and annotations by Kevin Michael Grace. The cover we created for this ebook is a mock-up of the original American First Edition by publisher John Day. We figured that you, our audience, had had enough of mugs and caps and t-shirts, and that you prefer an updated edition of one of the most important books about politics ever written, one that explains how the world really works. We devoted episode 72 of Grace and Steel to Burnham's Machiavellians, and then we started work on the book. On that note, I should add that we're not quite done yet. Kevin Michael Grace has assured me he will be finished his part by Friday morning, and then I'll proof it and convert it into all ebook formats. So I'm thinking we should be able to email it out by the end of the month, August 31st. If you enjoy our podcast and wish it to continue, please go to our website, twokevins.com, that's the number 2, followed by Kevins, plural, .com, and click on the donation button. Again, if you give $50 or more, you will receive an ebook version of James Burnham's The Machiavellians, with a new foreword and annotations by Kevin Michael Grace. At the $100 level, we'll send it to you twice. Now on with the show, which is called After Charlottesville. On August 12th, in Charlottesville, Virginia, a so-called Unite the Right protest against the removal of Confederate statues was shut down by authorities acting on a state of emergency ordered by Governor Terry McAuliffe. The police forced Unite the Right through the gauntlet of a mob of furious counter-protesters led by Antifa, and a melee ensued. About 4 hours later, a Unite the Right protester drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters blocking a street, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer and injuring 19 others. Fields has since been charged with second-degree murder. The Battle of Charlottesville sent cultural Marxists and the Trump-hating media into a frenzy. They called for Trump to denounce the alt-right, which he did, but not to everyone's satisfaction, especially as he blamed equally what he dubbed the alt-left. Demands for Trump to make groveling apologies for his balanced response were unavailing. Senior Republicans, including the Speaker of the House of Representatives and John McCain and Marco Rubio, came down on the side of Antifa, while CEOs resigned en masse from the President's Manufacturing Council, which Trump then disbanded. The alt-left acted unilaterally to destroy a multitude of memorials, even one to Christopher Columbus, while talk of laying waste to Mount Rushmore was entertained. Tech companies were soon banning and demonetizing everyone to the right of Paul Ryan. The Cultural Revolution has come to America. Have we learned anything, Kevin? What did Charlottesville and the extraordinary events that followed teach you?
That it was America's Reichstag fire. I'll just explain briefly for those people who don't understand the historical reference. The Reichstag building, the German parliament, was set ablaze February 27th, 1933, which was just 5 weeks after Hitler became chancellor. Now, there's been a historical debate about who set the fire, but the Nazis said it was a Dutch anarchist, communist named Marinus van der Lubbe who did it. Most historians believe that is in fact who did it, but what's important about it was this fire was used as an excuse for the Nazis to move into a full-on dictatorship.
Okay, and the analogy works which way?
Well, you see, what the Nazis said was that the Reichstag fire proved how toxic the enemies of Germany were, and that such niceties as parliamentary democracy, civil rights, etc., they could no longer be afforded in this crisis.
Okay.
And what's happened at Charlottetown is that
Charlottesville?
Yeah. Charlottesville. I may make that mistake again.
Uh-huh.
It's a Canadian thing. You wouldn't understand, okay? Well, you
Canadian.
would, but yeah. But a young woman was killed by a car at Charlottesville. Now, the circumstances of that are still very murky. But in any event, the alt-right, which is said to equal white nationalists, white supremacists, Nazis, and the KKK, was judged responsible for this, wholly responsible for this. So the alt-right, or that is to say political dissidents of any kind, equals Hitler. And since we can't go back into time via our time machine and kill Hitler, we are compelled to kill the rebirth of Hitler, which is what is allegedly happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's their excuse. That's their attempt at moral justification for what's happening right now.
Well, yes, yeah. And this is not an exaggeration, because you could see that Trump denounced the Unite the Right forces in Charlottesville. Mm-hmm. He went so far as to call James Fields, the man who's been arrested for the death of Heather Heyer, a terrorist and a murderer. I'll get back to that. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't enough, because he condemned the other side, the Antifa and Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And condemned them again, but it wasn't enough. And amazingly, the establishment right, the typical magazines, the usual suspects, and let's see, Marco Rubio, John McCain,
yes.
Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney.
The worst of them, yeah.
Have come in on the side of Antifa, essentially. And astonishingly, we're recording this on Friday, August the 18th. Mitt Romney said today that Trump should apologize. That's not what's most extraordinary about his statement on Facebook, is that he said, en passant, that our soldiers are watching. Now, we had the extraordinary event earlier this week where top military leaders were commenting on the events of Charlottesville and Trump's response. The implication is quite clear, that Romney is threatening a coup.
Yes, that's the way I interpreted it. Yeah, directly. I actually tweeted him that, said it's a coup, and, I speculated perhaps it's a coup. Because, he is essentially demanding that Trump support the big lie. We know that there was violence from both sides.
We'll get to that. I want to talk about that at some length. But the other events of this week was that there was a massive deplatforming of the right on the internet and through the means by which people raise money on the internet. PayPal, Patreon, other such companies. I think even Tinder said that no haters would be allowed to sully their company, and I have labeled Tinder the meat market with a heart.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, this may be the end of the most prominent events, the most shocking events of this week. But it was announced today that Steve Bannon had left the White House. Mm-hmm. Now, it's being said that he resigned close to a couple of weeks ago, but this was not announced until today.
Okay.
There is no... I wrote about... I did a podcast roundup for VDare, which appeared a couple of days ago, and a couple of days ago now seems like months ago, in which I whined a little bit that one of the problems of a weekly podcast such as ours is the risk, the probability of being superannuated by unfolding events. And I guess we're lucky we're doing this today instead of yesterday as you wanted to. Because, how come your podcast didn't say anything about Steve Bannon? What are you guys, asleep or something?
We try to aim for the long view here, just because it takes me so long to get everything cleaned up and posted, so...
Let's talk about what happened in Charlottesville. Now, you have the Lee Park being renamed Emancipation Park, Lee for General Robert E. Lee, the commander of the forces of the Confederate States of America. And the attempt to remove a statue of the great man from the park. Jason Kessler, who, as I understand, a native of, if not a native, then someone who certainly lives in Charlottesville, was the head organizer of a Unite the Right conference, in which a bunch of other people were coming, including Pax Dickinson, a man that I've had a lot of time for in the past. We've mentioned him on this show, right?
Yeah.
But I am really confused about this because I didn't follow it all that closely because, well, I'll mention why in a minute. Now, Richard Spencer seemed to move front and center of this, and the good doctor, David Duke, showed up and spread his poison as a slug leaves a trail.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really understood the purpose of this conference, Unite the Right, because a bunch of people, several dozen at least, showed up with Nazi flags, which still had their stiff creases in them, indicating that they'd been ordered special for this rally.
That's right.
And we had people walking around, at least one person walking around with a T-shirt with a quote from Adolf Hitler on the back. Supposedly, people were chanting, "Jews will not replace us." I don't know whether that's true because I had heard that they had been chanting, "You will not replace us," which sounds more likely. But in any event, the purpose of this gathering seems uncertain to me. It also seems foolish for the reason
that particular gathering, I think it was just to protest the removal of the statues, wasn't it?
Yeah, but park? Unite the Right.
Oh, that part. Yeah, I didn't get that.
That part.
It's,
and
let's
explain that Charlottesville is the heart of the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
That it's the home of the University of Virginia. And let's not forget that it was just a couple of years ago that the infamous Night of Broken Glass supposedly happened at a frat party, where a woman was raped repeatedly upon a bed of broken glass from a shattered coffee table. Of course, this was all nonsense.
Yeah, but the media ran with it.
They bought it in Charlottesville, and the University of Virginia went with it as far as they could take it. I'll also mention that this strange fellow called another doctor, Wes Bellamy, is the vice mayor of Charlottesville. This man is completely bonkers. Mm-hmm. He's out of his mind. He was joking on Twitter years ago about raping women, constantly going on about how much he hated white people. Apparently it snowed briefly in Charlottesville, and this set him off to a fury because he hates white people. And now, snow. Does it get any worse than that? He's the vice mayor of Charlottesville.
Purple
and of course,
rain. Sorry.
Yeah, of course, Terry McAuliffe is the governor of Virginia.
No time for that guy.
And he's a notorious character.
Mm-hmm.
My point is that they went to the heart of the enemy, and were they prepared for this? No, they were not prepared for it. They were not prepared in two ways. They were not prepared to deal with the accusation that this was a Nazi/KKK rally. Because if they didn't want to leave this impression, anyone showing up babbling on about Hitler or with a swastika flag or the like would have been told to, and pardon my French, get the fuck out of here. This is America. That didn't happen. Even the elementary precautions of protecting themselves against urine being thrown at them, bear spray being sprayed into their face and the like, these steps were not taken. If you're going to plan what is in effect a military operation, then you need expertise, and there was no expertise. In their defense, the organizers of the Unite the Right rally talk about how they were double-crossed. They were double-crossed because they had valid permits, and there was a court battle over this, but they had valid permits. And then, the city of Charlottesville and the state of Virginia turned against them, violated a court order, and declared the march illegal, declared a state of emergency, and then proceeded to force the Unite the Right people through a gauntlet of Antifa. They basically had to fight their way out. All this week on Twitter, I have been battling with people accusing me of not knowing what happened in Charlottesville. I know very well what happens in Charlottesville. And all of it points to the gross incompetence, or worse, of the organizers.
Okay. You're not going to give McAuliffe's betrayal any short shrift or anything like that? Because I thought he deserves some of the blame here, though. Simply because, well, I mean, he created the situation with this abuse of power, and okay, the other guys.
Why would you expect anything less from him?
Oh, okay.
That is my argument.
Okay, all right.
Why would you expect anything less?
Sorry, no, I can't argue with that.
Now, again, several of the people who were angry with me on Twitter said you should be grateful that our side, that is the Unite the Right side, exercised restraint, because a number of us were armed, and this could have become quite bloody. And this rather took my breath away, because I thought this was supposed to be some sort of good-timey getting together, but now it was some sort of beer hall putsch that failed to come off?
Yeah, difficult to say. I don't know. There were people there with guns, and they made reference to those guns. McAuliffe made reference to them, saying, I think at one point, that the protesters were better armed than the police.
Oh, the militia, he called them. Yeah, we're better armed than the police. Now, curiously, a couple of paragraphs of McAuliffe's ravings were erased from the New York Times website.
Yeah, that was a good deal. Yeah.
This is what we have to understand. The other side is liars. They have no interest, no love of the law, of the Constitution, or of any of our statutory protections. They don't. It's foolish to believe that they would. I'll remind listeners of a statement made by the Reverend Jesse Jackson. It isn't over until it's over, and even then it's not over. Those are the people that we are fighting. Mm-hmm. They believe in one thing: victory by any means necessary. Now,
how do you fight that?
How do you fight that? Yeah. You fight that, first of all, by being smarter. Now, it occurred to me that if plans had been drawn up in order to somehow avoid being foiled by police, there's a very strong chance that these people, the leaders and others who took part, would be indicted by local, state, and federal authorities for conspiracy.
Right, okay.
They have the power, and we do not have the power. Now, people are talking about road war, people are talking about civil war, and it may come to it. Especially after the events of this week, I am more and more persuaded that this is an actual possibility. However, this is not something that any of us on our side should want to precipitate, especially since it's clear we're not ready for it. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that perhaps the biggest lesson of Charlottesville is that Richard Spencer is poison. And that Richard Spencer must be isolated, humiliated, shunned. He must be forgotten. He has the King Midas touch in reverse. Everything he touches turns to lead.
Well, I think that there may have been, I guess, some poor messaging out there, because, that whole thing about, never punch to the right, Okay, so as these other guys come in and attach themselves to the movement, or attach themselves to Trump because he's winning, you're kind of thinking, well, do I punch to the right because these guys are assholes, or they're poison? And, they're quoting nobody but Richard Spencer and David Duke, of all people.
Yeah, well, you
Plastic Man,
I can, we'll have to look this up because I've forgotten who said it. but no punching to the right. It doesn't mean that we can't exercise quality control. I cannot.
That might have been Vox. That might have been Vox. I don't know. Yeah.
I cannot stress the importance of all measures necessary taken to isolate and eliminate people LARPing as KKK, people LARPing as neo-Nazis. Well, let's talk of white nationalism from the dissident right. Let's take a look at the Unite the Right. We want these people on our side. Why would we want these people on our side? Keep in mind, I think this is crucial to remember. What sort of people would declare themselves National Socialists, would declare themselves Nazis or Hitlerites at a time when that movement and everything associated is literally less popular than Satanism?
Yes, well, there are two types, probably crazy people and those that are working for the federal government. So.
Well, David Duke has been accused of working for the federal government many, many times, going back a long time, going back decades. I'll say this about Dr. Duke, that he's either a Fed, being paid for them, or he's a voluntary Fed, doing it because he just likes screwing things up and he just can't get enough attention. Now, people have been making the same claims about Richard Spencer, and one doesn't want to fall victim to paranoia, but I've begun to entertain them as well.
Yeah. The thing that I disliked about this is because we've seen many things like this in the past. The street theater of where you have a protest from some right-wingers. I see this all the time in Britain. We used to see it in Canada as well. And then strangely, for some reason, the Antifa show up. They seem to know everything all about this kind of thing. And then rocks are thrown, punches are thrown, and then the media takes pictures of the crazy guys on the right, their bloody foreheads and that kind of thing. And it's all the Antifa aren't even mentioned, they're just like the violence that they caused is never talked about. And that's what I was seeing here. And it's going all the way to the top.
It's going all the way to the top with the argument that Antifa is the good guys. Because these people who are neo-Nazis or people who are claimed to be neo-Nazis have no rights. And since they have no rights, everything that can be done to them. Also point out, all this talk about lawsuits, there have been many such gatherings by neo-Nazis and actual KKK going back years ago in which Antifa has pitched in and there's been a pitched battle and there's been injuries or deaths. Antifa always instigates the violence and yet they always win in court.
Okay. Well.
Now, let's talk about the police. A bunch of people on the right were very, very angry with the police, and it was like back before Ferguson, when a great proportion of the right had determined the police were our enemies. The police are functionaries. They do as they're told. Furthermore, every police force over time comes to resemble the community from which it's drawn. And so the police in Charlottesville would reflect the opinions of the people living in Charlottesville. That is to say, they would have no love for the Unite the Right people. What's most important, however, is that, and this has been demonstrated in court, the police are under no legal obligation to protect people from crime. That's important. People should remember that. Also, the police do not like to risk life and limb for anyone, really, regardless of who they are or what they believe in. The police have for, about 20 years now, been dominated by this idea that they call secure the perimeter. We saw this at that massacre in Colorado.
Right, yeah.
What was it?
Back in 1999 or something?
What was the name of the place?
Columbine. When was
Columbine.
That? Yeah. Secure
the perimeter. There were students and teachers bleeding out in the school. They were begging for their lives, and the cops knew they were begging for their lives. The cops did not enter the building until they were almost certain that everyone was dead.
Sure, but that was much discussed. In fact, it led to some change in certain police forces, knowing that this had happened. They changed their technique to going in. That thwarted an attack in Montreal at a college there. There was some change.
Okay, as a general principle, the police don't want to get involved. What happened in Seattle, the so-called Battle of Seattle, the WTO protests, is that Antifa ran amok in downtown Seattle, smashing all these windows, smashing Starbucks or whatever. The police sat on their hands. At 5 o'clock, when the office tower started emptying, the police went after people trying to go home, presumably because they'd been humiliated by what happened earlier. In Vancouver, where I lived most of my life, pretty peaceful town for the most part, the police lost control of the whole of downtown to a bunch of drunken hockey hooligans because they decided not to intervene and they decided to let the riot play itself out.
Mm-hmm.
You can't depend on the police. I mean, one would have thought that seeing Trump supporters, being attacked with impunity again and again last year during the election would have proved something to the right, but apparently it has not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hope that the events in Charlottesville will have made some lessons very clear indeed to our side. I mean, to boil this down, too long didn't read. Stop being stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Stop pretending that the world is not the way that it is.
Get rid of the neo-Nazis.
Yeah, get rid of the neo-Nazis, but that falls under the rubric of being stupid.
Right, yeah.
Now, let's talk about what's happened since then. That this idea of a Lügenpresse, as the Germans call it, the lying media, every time I think that they can't go any further, they go further. Oh, Trump's refusal to attack the neo-Nazis. What were they talking about? What are they talking about?
Mm-hmm.
See, what they're angry about is that Trump said, that we have two bad sides. And he also mentioned, about Antifa instigating the violence. And he introduced this term alt-left to the absolute rage of the left and the media as a whole. The media decided that no people who do not hold our views can be allowed to speak.
Yeah.
They will be destroyed.
Well, they will attempt to destroy them anyway.
But, we already have these stories, of we talked about this earlier. Oh, you're not going to get your money for 180 days. Oh, I see. There's a word for people who can just forget about current accounts for 180 days. Do you know what that word is?
Thieves.
No, the word is rich.
Oh, I see. Excuse me. Yeah, you're talking about the people that hold that whose money it actually is. Yes. Yeah, I know we hashed over that already, but when you're talking about tactics here, you're basically at this point saying no rallies, or no rallies organized by strange people that used to support Occupy Wall Street in the heart of the enemy. I saw a lot of this defense of these people. They're actually doing something here.
They're making things worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
They're making things worse. Now, some people, they live under this delusion that the Charlottesville debacle will become mythic as time passes. And I'm wondering if they're thinking of the story of Horst Wessel. Horst Wessel was a Nazi street thug who was killed by communists. And he became the great martyr of the Nazis. And in fact, the great Nazi song, the Horst Wessel Lied, Die Fahne hoch, and all the rest of it, that came from Horst Wessel.
Right.
Well, I'll just note this, that if, this fellow James Fields becomes the Horst Wessel of America, then America's going to be a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
A nightmare to rival that of Nazi Germany.
Right.
Now, one more thing about James Fields. Well, what is he? He's Jewish? He's half Jewish or something? He's a paranoid schizophrenic?
Got that part. Yeah, that was, wow.
Yeah. Now, Trump, in calling him a murderer and a terrorist, at some length, mind you, it wasn't as simple as Nixon calling Charles Manson guilty. Well, of course he's guilty. Wasn't. Trump went into some detail about this. Now, you've heard my suspicions about the 28-dimension chess that Trump supposedly plays.
Mm-hmm. You mean about this particular move?
No, about in general.
Oh, yeah, well, that's...
I'll just say this. I'm beginning to come around to this. Now, whether Trump did this deliberately or subconsciously, the fact is that Trump may have saved fields. Because in the normal course of things, a local prosecution for second-degree murder, as opposed to, say, a federal prosecution. A local prosecution in Charlottesville, what do you think of the chances of this guy getting a fair trial would be? Particularly with Black Lives Matter howling outside and the jurors actually being able to hear the howling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it struck me that the likely fate of this guy, was to spend 5 years in prison becoming a homeboy sex toy. But now, after what Trump has said, the argument can be made with considerable justification that it would be very difficult for him to get a fair trial, especially in Charlottesville.
I don't know whether I buy the theory. This could be a Trayvon Martin situation for all we know. I mean, we saw that, and somebody did make that remark, that, this is the same press that howled about Trayvon Martin for like 2 years till the trial. And then it comes out, that the guy is completely exonerated.
Yeah.
They just bullshitted for 2 years about how guilty this guy was. And then it became obvious as soon as the evidence appeared that he was not. So, I don't know. We'll see what comes out. I went looking for the videos and things like this. It's all so inconclusive. They apparently had this overhead shot I was looking at thinking, that's not even the same car. I don't know what the hell's going on.
Well, let's look at the timeline here. George Zimmerman was acquitted of second-degree murder in July 2013, which is a little over than 4 years ago. The country has changed since then. There's an old saying, which expresses a great truth, that it is better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. But you need honest jury members who are not afraid to be held responsible for their verdicts. I'm not really counting on this universally in the United States.
Yeah, of course. But what will appear, if there is any kind of defense, I suppose, is probably some evidence that is clearer than what we've been presented with to this point. That's all, looking on YouTube videos and, that are edited. Look at what happens here. Look at what happens here. This happened so long after the event that, as somebody pointed out, it was like 5 hours of violence, and then this thing happened.
The evidence, physical evidence, DNA evidence, all the circumstantial evidence, the fact that there was a clear motive established against O.J. Simpson was overwhelming. He was found not guilty, and it wasn't even close. And what was the reason for that? Because of the jury that was picked. The jury that was picked in downtown Los Angeles rather than in Santa Monica, where the crime actually occurred. Just saying you can't count on jurors any longer.
Sure, well, I'm not saying the guy is innocent. I'm just saying we'll see what the evidence shows us, because what they're being presented with now is the narrative, and it may be as torqued as the Trayvon Martin evidence was.
Okay.
The way that was, that's all. I don't want to defend the guy, but
I don't know what happened. Let's just talk about this a bit. Ever since Ferguson, you and I have been talking about this possibility, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened before now. That somebody, let's say a woman, gets caught up in one of these protests, and the highway is being blocked. She doesn't know why it's being blocked. She doesn't care why it's being blocked. And she attempts to avoid this blockade, whereupon her car is set upon by a bunch of thugs, pounding on it, bashing it, kicking it, screaming murder into her face through the glass. And she panics. Maybe she's got a kid in the car, maybe 2 in the car. And she panics and just decides to get out of there as fast as she can. And she runs over some people. Now, I believe, going back to 1968, one of the most famous things that George Wallace ever said was that if any of these protesters decide to sit in front of my car, it's going to be the last thing they ever do.
Okay. The panic thing, and I will say what I say when you bring that up, is, I bring up the example of that lady that was gunned down in front of the Capitol by the Capitol Police. She had panicked with her kid in the car. Obviously, she didn't know what was happening. She freaked out, and they just shot her down. And then
then there was a unanimous resolution from the House of Representatives praising the Capitol Police in their brave action of shooting to death a woman, next to her child, a woman who was caught in a little traffic difficulty.
Yeah, in a panic situation, yeah. But, it could be something like that. We don't know. Like I said, we're going to see the evidence. We know the background of this guy. We know that he was a neo-Nazi, but we also know he was a schizophrenic on medication. I don't know if he was on medication at this particular time, but there's some suggestion of diminished responsibility here. That's for sure. I don't know how it's going to play out. But anyways, it doesn't matter. They moved swiftly to use this as a pretext to start or accelerate the Cultural Revolution. That's pretty obvious. And I think that's what we're dealing with here. It doesn't matter how it's going to turn out in court. We're dealing with the Cultural Revolution now because CNN, the probably worst news organization in the world, has decided that, there's no other violence but that on the far right.
Let's talk about that now. Now, you mentioned CNN in that respect, and I have to laugh, although this is quite grim, that after the terrorist attack in Barcelona, I made a joke on Twitter. How long before the first person in the mainstream media claims that these Islamic killers were triggered by Charlottesville? Now, I was just joking, but the problem with making jokes about this is that they have this nasty habit of coming true. I'm thinking, what am I going to wake up to tomorrow? That Canadian troops have invaded the Donbass in the Ukraine? Is that coming next? And
we don't have any troops.
People were saying, it's going to be MSNBC, right? But it wasn't MSNBC. It was Wolf Blitzer. It was that Wolf Blitzer who first did it. Now, Wolf Blitzer is considered one of the more respectable members of the mainstream media.
I don't consider him respectable at all. I consider him a little punk, a lying little punk.
Okay, all right.
Here's to you, Wolf. You're a lying little punk.
Okay. And so the media decided that Trump has to apologize. That he has to apologize for saying, we have two groups of bad people here, the alt-right and the alt-left, and I'll note in passing that this term alt-right may be finished. I don't really think it's all that important. Call it the alt-right, call it the dissident right, call it macaroni salad. Are these terms all that important?
No, the alt-right was useful to identify the people that were not establishment Republicans prior to the election. So of no use now anyway to identify anybody other than Richard Spencer, I guess. He can have it.
But there was a coordinated attack here. The media went off against the alt-right, all people associated with the alt-right, all people who were seen as defenders of Trump, all people who were seen as not full-throated supporters of the leftist narrative in its entirety, and they moved to no platform as many of these people as they could. VDare got hit, their PayPal got taken away from them. I mean, I won't go into the list. We'll link to a list. Yeah. It's a very long list. Our friend Ryan Landry, initially I thought he'd been booted off Twitter and that his website had been taken down. It turns out his website is 28sherman.com is still there. He has stopped doing his podcast. He's retired from that, and I gather he's going to retire from political advocacy. He's a young man with a wife and 3 young children, the third one just being born. And he's decided that I guess his usefulness is in other aspects of life, the non-immediately political aspects of life. We're going to see more and more of this because a lot of the people who have come on because of the excitement, of trolling and shitlording and all that, Well, let's put it this way. When people who work for a pizza parlor are being fired for their political opinions, then
it ain't worth it. Yeah.
A whole bunch of people are going to clear out. Now, let's talk about Trump's response to this. Trump has refused to apologize, and Trump has, in fact, doubled down on this. He has gone so far as to defend the Confederate monuments and pointed out that Washington and Jefferson themselves were slave owners. Now, again, are they going to call for, the Washington Monument, all the Washington monuments and the Jefferson Memorial to be torn down? Well, and for Mount Rushmore to be blown up? Yep, we're hearing that. A statue of Abraham Lincoln was set on fire, well, repeatedly, it would seem, in a heavily black Chicago neighborhood. Now, some people are saying this was bootleg fireworks that got out of hand, but no one is safe. Basically, they're coming for all of us.
Sure. Well, the Capitol is actually named after Washington, and maybe I can get on board with this. Maybe we should rename that city. We can call it the Swamp.
We call it the Swamp. Well, I suppose the logical thing would be to name it after the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the plagiarist and orgiast.
That's right. King Swamp.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But no, the left has been emboldened that this is the moment in history, when the revolution is apparent, and that all of these heads pop out, from the parapet, and I see they're on that side too. Well. Arnold Schwarzenegger is on that side too. It's really come to that. I joked in VDare a couple of days ago that every time I look at Drudge, I half expect to see Trump arrested, VP Pence held in secure location, Ryan Schumer to lead Government of National Reconciliation, social media sites shut down 7 days for national security.
Yeah, well, I think that's the kind of thing that Romney and McCain and the Bush family are dreaming of. The Clintons as well. This is, I think this is their wet dream. I don't think it's going to happen. You see this,
I think there's a flood. There's a flood. There's a flood in the tide of human events, right?
That's true.
Yeah. And just to give you an example of that flood, after Steve Bannon's departure from the White House was announced, there was a headline at the Huffington Post. Did you see that?
Yeah. Goy man.
Goy bye.
Goy bye, yeah.
This is extraordinary. This is absolutely extraordinary. That the message of this is clear. The message of this, according to the Huffington Post, is that the Jews run America and that filthy goy Steve Bannon is out, as he should be out, of course. Now, there was a bunch of, that the headline was taken down and replaced with white flight. Get it? White flight. Oh, so it's not so much the Jews are running things now. It's that you filthy white people are finally getting what you deserve. They want a race war.
Well, that'll be interesting.
I mean, I could point out that there was a race war in Europe in the 1940s. That did not end up very well, did it?
Ugh. God. I just want to retire peacefully to the country. And here we are headed for World War III. Well, it's that far. I mean, you had tweeted out something that I saw gabbed. It showed up on Gab, and I think that people enjoyed it so much that they would throw it on other platforms. Do you want to go over that tweet?
No, you say it.
Well, I don't know it verbatim. But basically, you said all we have to do is maintain.
Well, I believe I said something like, "Cheer up, friends."
Yeah.
That if we maintain message discipline and avoid goonery, our enemies will self-destruct. Now, this was in reference to a story that Steve Saylor had about one of these fawning, oh, here's the latest ethnic food trend that all of you shallow white people should get behind, and it's bubble tea. There's bubble tea all over Vancouver and Victoria. I never knew what it was, and I never sought to partake in it, but apparently the New York Times used this phrase, gelatinous blobs, referring to tapioca. Now, why people would want tapioca in their tea is an interesting question. I make no judgment. But then the New York Times was forced to, they scrubbed the story, and they apologized for it because a bunch of, some Korean guy got angry. Now, just as a side note here, this question of the survival of the United States. You have a white majority which is becoming smaller and smaller. I'd say probably 65% now, but falling rapidly. Black people have, to a large extent, become internal emigres. They don't consider themselves Americans. America is a racist country which was built on the bones, literally, of black people, so how can we be loyal to it? We have all of these immigrants which have flooded into the United States, and they have this cohort. With each generation, there are more and more descendants. They have never bought into the American idea, whatever it is. They're only interested in their own ethnic interests. All this talk about model minorities, I find this absolutely hilarious. Whenever I see some preposterous article or op-ed piece in the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail for that matter, or Global News, about how evil white people, here's your latest instructions about why you can't have liberty anymore. It's written by a Chinese woman or a Korean woman or an Indian woman or a Japanese woman, etc., etc. Marco Rubio, I believe, another model minority, a Cuban, pretty much went the furthest in this regard amongst the top politicians in saying that people with unpleasant views, horrible views, well, they have no rights and they deserve everything they get.
Right. Which sounds like the preamble to war, doesn't it?
The question is, when historians look back at this, they always say, well, the war had been going on, underground, as it were, for some time. I mean, you could argue, if the United States is heading towards some sort of civil war, some sort of race war, that historians would speak of the Black Intifada, that black people for decades now have been murdering, robbing, and raping large numbers of white people, significant numbers of white people, with little in the way of reprisals. Because apparently white people deserve it. Because they have oppressed black people and they continue to oppress black people.
Okay, so what? That's what they're going to say in the future?
They may say that in the future.
Because it's not going to be, if there's a race war, it's not going to be black on white,
It's going to be everybody against everybody.
Yeah.
Is what it's going to be. Now, all of these brave people on Twitter, all of these brave white people on Twitter talking about how white people need to die out, I tend to think that they're going to be the first to go because they will have no allies. Who are their allies going to be? Hey, yeah, I know Quisling, and, I said that you're scum and that your entire race should die out, but there's a mob at my door. Could you please come and help me?
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
I keep telling them I'm one of the good whites, but they're not paying attention.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. You wanted to talk about solutions and what can be done. I mean, you talked about Ryan Landry backing out, getting burnt out. Other people are wanting to get involved and wanting to do something, and other people are accusing the talkers like us of no action, having no ideas other than complaining.
Well, before we get into that, I think we have to mention Ezra Levant. Some Americans and some of the people who listen to our podcast would know who he is.
Yeah,
I had a run-in with him, which was very unpleasant for me. He organized a conspiracy to destroy my career, and he largely succeeded. And you work for him. Your experience with him was much happier than mine.
That's right.
But he founded this. He was in charge of this Sun News Network, which failed because everything associated with Sun Media fails. And then after it failed, directly after, he started what is called the Rebel, of which he is the Rebel commander.
Rebel Media. Yeah.
Rebel Media, yeah. And I guess it's what you'd call alt-light, what they call it, or what they used to call it in any event. What's important here is that Ezra found a following, and he found enough people to give him money to keep this going and to expand it to other countries. In fact, that is to say that he had established a new structure in Canada that was independent of big business and big government. And then Richard Spencer enters the picture. That Gavin McInnes had done a friendly interview with Richard Spencer. McInnes had disagreed with him about things, and there were several other connections or interviews or mentions of Richard Spencer, proving once again that Richard Spencer is poison. Apparently, Richard Spencer is so poisonous that he can destroy the right wing in 2 countries, one of them not his own.
Oh, man.
There was a organized takedown of Ezra Levant and the Rebel that the media, coordinated by National News Watch, which is deep state news.
Very fake
Canada.
news, actually, I would call them.
Yeah.
They run CNN stories all the time, so I would call them National
Yeah.
News Watch. Very fake news, Canada.
Yeah, and the politicians got involved. All of the conservative politicians were pressured to no platform the Rebel and Ezra Levant, and they all complied, including Jason Kenney, who will soon be the Premier of Alberta, who is the cuck's cuck. He is one of Ezra Levant's oldest and closest friends.
You actually knew them way back when? You attended dinners where they were.
Yeah, that's right. They've
buddies.
been working in politics together since the mid 1990s. And Jason Kenney, he stuck a knife in Ezra's back. I fully expected him to, because Jason Kenney's kind of a pod person, a rootless pod person who lives entirely inside his head. But you wanted to talk about lessons. There's one.
No, I just wanted to add.
I wanted to say with regard to what the story of Ezra Levant demonstrates a bunch of things. There is a resistance infrastructure that exists in the United States. That is to say, not everything is controlled by big business and big government, and in Canada, everything is. And the power of the deep state is so great in Canada that an irritant, for 25 years or so, Ezra Levant has been tolerated as an amusing pest. Then it was decided he could no longer be tolerated, and he was crushed. So,
yeah, I think it's part of that is because they fear the influence of Trump affecting Canada.
Yes,
I think that's part of it. Let me put this in.
Yeah, okay.
I will just put this in because I want to go back to the Jason Kenney thing. Jason Kenney, we know about both of them. We knew about them when we were working for Alberta Report, and I worked for Ezra, of course, with the Western Standard. There's irony here in Jason Kenney denouncing him and Jason Kenney running for the premiership of Alberta because, as an Albertan, as I am, Ezra's family goes way back in Alberta, very deep roots here, over 100 years. And this carpetbagger Kenney is, denouncing him.
Ezra's family, I believe, goes back to 1903, which makes, his family's residence in Alberta longer than about, 95% of the people who live in Alberta now?
I would say, yeah.
Something like that. Jason Kenney comes from nowhere. This is what Newt Gingrich famously said about himself. And it's true of Jason Kenney. He was born in Ontario, raised in Saskatchewan. He went to the University of San Francisco, a Jesuit institution where he dropped out, where he was a prominent pro-life activist. He went back to Saskatchewan where he worked for the Liberal government. He worked for Ralph Goodale, a big shot Liberal to this day. And then he ended up in Edmonton, I believe around 1990, with the Alberta Taxpayers Association. And then, curiously, he decides to, he is talent spotted by the Reform Party, but he doesn't run in Edmonton, which is his only connection to Alberta. He's parachuted into Calgary. He was elected in Calgary in 1997, and as a result has spent the greatest part of his life since that time in Ottawa. And now he has come back to Alberta, or I guess he has to become refamiliar with white people because, I'm not joking here, he was Minister of Immigration for several years.
Of the country.
He boasted of the high numbers of immigration during a recession. He has made it clear that he believes Albertans to be lazy people who don't want to take good jobs, so better foreigners must be brought here. That his campaign for premier, which he will surely win because you don't need to be a Canadian citizen to vote for this new United Conservative Party, has been based on signing up people from India. And you can see that. If you doubt me, go to his Twitter feed and see the pictures of his organizational efforts, and you will see very few white faces there. Americans may be shocked to know that it is people from India who have been deciding pretty much every leadership battle in every party for decades in this country now.
There you go. And they also
I wanted to say
transportation industry, but
yeah, I wanted to say, we have Andrew Scheer, the new Conservative Party leader. We talked about him before. Yeah. He's the feminist. He's the guy concerned with tone. He denounced the rebel in very strong terms. And, of course, he didn't denounce Islamic terrorism because there's no such thing. But you see, look, I think Canada's lost politically. All right? I'll say that up front. I think that Canada is far more likely to fall apart. I mean, literally, for the central government to lose its power and for the provinces to peel off, another Yugoslavia situation. I think that scenario is more likely than a real right-wing opposition being formed anywhere in this country. But in the meantime, we are under no obligation whatsoever to support any of these cucks in any way, not even with a vote at the ballot box. Well, who are you going to vote for? The other guys? We don't have to vote at all. This isn't Australia. We're not forced to vote. We don't have to give them anything. They have made it clear that they despise us and want us replaced. So why would we support them?
Okay. Now, can we get on to the other part here? Now that we're, at the, let's say, final 10 minutes of the show, you had mentioned prior to the show that you had wanted to introduce some ideas regarding the United States.
Okay, well, you see that Steve Bannon has already rejoined Breitbart?
Oh, did that happen already?
Yeah, that happened already.
Oh, jeez. I just come on. Okay.
Yesterday, that Steve Bannon is still there. Today, Steve Bannon's gone. Oh, my God, what's going to happen now? He's finished. Well, what? He's at Breitbart again?
Okay. I closed my browser for 10 minutes and look what happens. Okay. I'd actually made a joke about
it's
that.
important.
Can I tell my joke? I want to tell my joke.
Yeah, sure. Tell
my
your
joke was tweeting out to Ezra, if Steve Bannon goes back to Breitbart, go pitch a Breitbart Ottawa to him. I just did that because I, wanted to troll, I guess, the braying monkeys that are the pundocracy in Canada, so that was my little troll of them. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe it's already happened. I don't know. Anyways, go ahead. No,
this is important. Trump grew out to a large extent of a movement that Breitbart, the original Breitbart, was part of. It is important that we have these alternative structures. As I said, there are no such alternative structures in Canada, and it's probably too late for that. But in the United States, it's not too late. These alternative structures must continue to exist. They must be augmented, strengthened, and supported. That's one. Two, boycott Apple. Tim Cook, the gay CEO of Apple, and I mentioned that he is gay because he has made a point of talking up his gayness and how it makes him a better CEO, because I guess gay people are better than the rest of us, that he announced that he was giving $1 million to the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith and $1 million to the SPLC. And the existence of, the ADL was founded to fight anti-Jewish persecution. All right? Mm-hmm. Now it has become like the Anne Frank Center, an organization that advocates for the replacement of white people. The SPLC, the same thing, for the crushing of all dissent. Now,
would we say that the SPLC is alt-left? No?
Yeah, it's alt-left before there was an alt-left.
Okay, there we go.
But, right. Okay, so, look, I know that there are a lot of conservatives, right-wingers, who use Apple products. I know that Scott Richard, who was a longtime managing editor at Chronicles, was an Apple apostle. That we can't have Wintel products anywhere in our office because they're no good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Apple has been about a kind of mania from the beginning. There is a right way and a wrong way, and there's the Apple way. That we brook no dissent. Oh, that you want to monochrome. Monochrome is the best. Why do people need color? That's what they say at the time of the Macintosh. Later, disk drives and Blu-ray support, and by the way, we own your Apple products. You're using them, but we own them. And if you do anything that we disapprove of, we will remotely turn it into a brick. Apple's a totalitarian company. Now, if you look at
Apple,
if you look at all of these companies which have been Aetna is one, Merck. You saw that Trump went after Merck after the CEO left his manufacturing council. Trump said, "I guess you can go back to gouging people for the price of drugs."
No, you can work on lowering the.
Yeah. You can work. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but. You see, we have to buy things. I think we talked about boycotts on the show before.
Yeah.
But okay, let's, I've done a 180 on boycotts. Okay.
I don't know. You're going to cut around a few times there.
Well, okay. So now I'm in favor of boycotts. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That, I like that show Silicon Valley. That's on HBO. I guess I can buy the Blu-rays, right? There's no reason for me to have an HBO subscription. Just the extent of divorcing yourself from the corporate paws as much as is possible. Find out about these companies, and it doesn't take a lot of work because they're constantly boasting about how much they are in favor of the revolution, how they're supporting the revolution every step of the way. Delta Airlines. We mentioned that with regard to Ann Coulter. Now, I know a lot of people are trapped into flying Delta because of the allocation of routes in the United States and the importance of hubs. But to the extent that you don't have to fly Delta, don't fly Delta.
Don't. Oh, well, there's a huge list now. I mean, that was the problem that you had said with the boycotts, is that there's just so many of them. But then again, it's not like I have a lot of disposable income. It's pretty easy for me to do boycott stuff. People with money, I suppose, have a little more difficulty. But,
sure. But, if you find out that, a company that makes your mustard has decided that it's going to, force all its employees to dress up in rainbow colors, then I guess you can switch to the generic mustard, right?
Not the mustard. Okay, I understand what you're saying here, but when we were discussing this earlier...
No, I have another idea. I have another idea, and this is perhaps the most important.
Pencils out?
People have been asking, what can you do? Oh, it's not enough to sit on the couch. Okay, well, some of us are couch sitters and some of us are more active. For those people who are more active, I would suggest the following. In 1958, Charles de Gaulle came out of exile, was called out of exile in order to save France, which he did. And for decades afterwards, France was largely controlled by so-called Gaullist parties. That were parties that traced their descent from Charles de Gaulle or claimed to represent his legacy. The goal of right-wingers in the United States should be to create a Trumpist party, to replace the GOP, the Republican Party, with the Trumpist party. This involves the creation of a myth, and that myth is already existing, which is that Trump is the man who has saved America. And I can tell you, I don't think this is a surprise to our listeners, that if Hillary Clinton had been elected president, the FEMA camps would be full of political dissidents already.
I know,
that it is only Trump who has prevented this. But Trump cannot do this alone. That people have to get involved. And one of these people who follows me on Twitter, Jay Rocker, was saying that people are already doing this. One of the advantages of getting into politics on the Trumpist level, is that you will find that the people you are dealing with are normies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this idea that somehow weaponized autism, as they call it, is going to save the United States, save the West, that is not going to happen. For any movement, I mean, you look at the American Revolutionary Movement, and it was a revolutionary movement. These people were revolutionaries who were committing sedition and were prepared to give up their lives. For the most part, they were pretty sound men. They were not crazies. They were not autists.
That's right. Regular guys like Paul Revere.
You see, we should cheer up, because the other side is already going to overplay its hand. It's already overplayed its hand with all this talk of a coup, with blaming violence everywhere in the world on Donald Trump. But, the creation of Trumpist parties knocks the GOP out of the box. If the left were smart, which it is not, if it were sober, which it is not, it would simply, and by the left, I mean the Democratic Party and the GOP party, would simply frustrate Trump every step along the way, to the extent that in the midterm elections, they could say Trump is failure as a president, and the Democrats would take over Congress. And then 2 years later, Trump has been a failure as president. The Democrats would elect the next president. The Republicans could get back to being well-compensated traitors. And then, life would have been restored to normal. But it is true enough that the Trump revolution, whatever you want to call it, is not going to get very far without the support in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate. And efforts must be made, as strong as are necessary, to force out the Quislings and replace them with Trumpists. And this is something that is easy for people to do. They can do it on a casual basis, or they can devote a lot of time to it. And that kind of political activity reassociates the right with normalcy and not deviancy, as we saw in Charlottesville.
Critical point right there. Yep. Get back to the normies. Dump the deviants.
Save your country before it's too late. Use the means that are possible and legal to do so. Don't let your country become like Canada. Because, look to Canada. I always go back to this well, but it's a well that never seems to run dry, no matter how many buckets I take out of it. That you see that something as modest as a news organization which didn't parrot the narrative was crushed ruthlessly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a hard lesson. I suppose it's one that we already knew would go down. But now that it has, and they used an American event for it, I guess we really don't stand a chance of forming a new party here in Canada right away. And my province, of course, will be lost to Conservatives. But there's reason to hope.
Well, we had a new party.
Game.
We had a very different party in Canada called, good name, I think, Reform Party. And then what happened, curiously, was that the federal government, again, I'm not making this up, look up Heritage Front. The federal government formed a fake group of neo-Nazis, which became the leading neo-Nazi group in Canada, which was paid for and directed by the federal government. They used it to infiltrate the Reform Party to have them associated with neo-Nazis. Now, at that time, Preston Manning, the leader of the Reform Party, was talking about reducing immigration from 250,000 to 150,000 a year, which is not all that radical a step. But Preston Manning got the message, and he didn't talk about immigration anymore. Mm-hmm. And then it was decided, big money decided, and the media decided that we couldn't have this Reform Party because it meant the Liberals were going to win always. Now, that wasn't necessarily true, but never mind that. That's a historical argument. But what had to happen was that the Reform Party had to, there had to be a reverse takeover with the Conservatives taking it over. And the Conservative Party had been crushed, and then it was mysteriously resurrected.
Okay, I just want to point this out. I guess the last lesson that we want to give is, if you do get this Trumpist party going, never merge with the GOP.
No,
we absorb it.
I believe
from the top
that
down, swallow it up, but don't merge with them.
Yeah, I believe that my friend Peter Brimlow has spoken about the Whig Party many times. The Whig Party was replaced wholesale by the Republican Party. The Whig Party vanished. It's happened before, and it can happen again. The GOP, its senators and its congressmen are, for the most part, very unpopular, because the American people know that they do not do what they promise. And the Tea Party movement failed. Called betrayal. The Tea Party movement failed because it was infiltrated by GOP cucks who said, oh, well, yeah, we are with you on your anti-government stance all the way. But you see, we're the experts here, so you must let us direct this. Mm-hmm. And it was perverted. It was run off the rails, which led to the Trumpist reaction. Traitors can't be trusted. They can never be trusted.
Romney, McCain, Rubio, Bush, you're out.
Schwarzenegger, Arnie joined the pro-Antifa
okay.
side.
I'm sure there's a long list.
Yeah, long list. Yes,
but get the people that support your views in there. That's a difficult thing to do. It's easy for us to say from this distance, but I think that's where you should concentrate your energies. Leave the trolling to us. No, just kidding. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up at this point. Any dissent with that?
No. I'll just say one last thing. The Reverend Sidney Smith, the English writer, he famously said, I think these are good words to live by. Take short views, trust in God, and hope for the best.
Okay, sounds great. I just want to add as a note here that the theme music this week is being brought to you by the Capacitors, the surf version of our theme. That's the non-existent band of a buddy of mine.
Well, you want to mention by name?
No, not yet. No, that's fine.
Okay, all right. Okay.
We can explain that in a Christmas podcast or something like that. Anyways, that brings us to the end of episode 90 of Grace and Steel. I'm Kevin Steele.
And I'm Kevin Michael Grace. Stay strong, friends.
If you enjoy our podcast and wish it to continue, please go to our website, twokevins.com. That's the number 2, followed by Kevins, plural.com, and click on the donation button. If you give $50 or more, you will receive an ebook version of James Burnham's The Machiavellians with a new foreword and annotations by Kevin Michael Grace.